Canada. There has been a lot of talk about imposing tariffs, not just from the US, but from the EU and elsewhere. Is that the way forward if you can't get China to reciprocate and open up in the way that you want?
So I would hope that if we negotiate from strength and talk about what our expectations are, China's going to value their relationship with us as well. And we'll meet in the middle somewhere and come to an agreement that irons out the U.S.'s concerns and China's concerns as well before we would have to get to a position where somebody takes a more harsh move and raises the tariff rate.
You're listening to Money Talk on RTHK Radio 3.
That was Courtney Dentlinger, Director of the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, and Greg Ibach, Director of the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, who have been visiting Hong Kong and China this week as part of a trade delegation from the States. In the markets, the ASX 200 in Australia currently up about 0.6%, Nikkei 225 in Japan currently up about 1%, and the Kospi is down about 0.25% in South Korea. Thank you very much for listening this week. Have a great weekend. I'll be back on Monday morning at 8 o'clock with more Money Talk. The weather forecast for today, sunny intervals. It's going to become cloudy with 1 or 2 rain patches. The maximum temperature is going to be about 26 degrees. Cloudy with a few rain patches in the next few days. Significantly cooler midweek. And the temperature right now is 24 degrees. The relative humidity, 84%. 8:31, here's Samantha Butler with the news.
Scientists say they found a way of genetically modifying plants to improve growth, which could play a crucial role in boosting global crop production. The research, which was carried out on tobacco plants, focused on improving the efficiency of photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert sunlight into chemical energy. They recorded increased yields of 15%. The lead scientist in the United States, Professor Stephen Long, said world hunger could be eased if this could be replicated in food crops.
By the year 2050, we're going to need 70% more food. This can really answer this issue, and particularly the areas of the world where food shortages are likely to be most acute.
The Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is meeting the US President-elect Donald Trump in New York, the first foreign leader to do so. Mr. Trump has unsettled Japan and other Asian countries with his election pledges to make allies pay more for US military support. His opposition to a trans-Pacific trade deal, a cornerstone of President Obama's policy, has also fueled concern in Asia. Delegates attending a major international conference in Morocco have called for intense political commitment to combat climate change. They've been meeting amid concerns that the US president-elect may roll back on his country's commitments to cut greenhouse gases. The BBC's Matt McGrath is in Marrakesh.
Donald Trump's promise to cancel the Paris Agreement and end financial support for international climate action has galvanised the countries meeting here in Morocco. They've issued the Marrakesh Action Proclamation, which sees 197 parties assert their belief that the world is warming at an unprecedented rate. Every country, it says, has an urgent duty to respond. The momentum to tackle climate change is irreversible, the document says, and all countries must now demonstrate the highest political will on the issue as a matter of priority.
You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Good morning. Welcome to Backchat. I'm Hugh Chiverton, your co-host today. Danny Gittings. Danny, good morning to you.
Good morning.
The two Youngspiration lawmakers, it's been announced, are going to appeal against that ruling on the judicial review, and it's due to be heard next week. The judgment and the appeal raise many questions like how long could this go on and what happens to LegCo in the interim. So what do you make of the judgment and what do we learn from it about the status of the Legislative Council, the Chief Executive and the separation of powers? Should the President of LegCo join an appeal to protect it? Do you share Martin Lee's suspicions about the pair? Email us with your thoughts, questions and comments. Our address, backchat@rthk.hk. You can go to our Facebook page, which is Backchat and RTHK Radio 3, and comment there. Or you can call us on 233-88266, 233-88266. After 9:20, we're talking about choosing expensive moisturising cream. Joining us for our first discussion, we have with us now Lawrence Ma, who's a barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. Mark Daly, who's an international human rights lawyer. Holden Chow and Chris Young will be joining us later in the programme.
Lawrence Marr, good morning. Let's go to you first.
Good morning, Hugh, and morning, Danny.
What do you make of these latest developments? The Young Inspiration, they want to go back. They want to go back to court, and they say that the Legislative Council president they shouldn't be left to them to defend the separation of powers in the Legislative Council. That the Legislative Council president should join the action. Is that your view?
I think the appeal is unmeritorious. If you read the judgment carefully, they didn't put forward any positive case that their oath-taking was proper. So the entire matter rests on a legal point, which is whether the principle of non-intervention should be respected. That means whether the court should intervene, right? And in my view, the court respects different roles of the other branches of government, and these branches need to consider matters relevant to them. So the judiciary recognized that in socio-economic policies where choices have to be made between individual rights and scarce of resources, it is more appropriate to defer those matters to a democratically elected body, for example, the legislature.
I don't want to get into legalese here. I'm a bit confused about that last part, though. You're talking about spending government money. That's the sort of thing you do in cases about spending money on social welfare and so on. This is about people taking... And in fact, I agree with you, that has come up in court cases like this, like that. This is something rather different. This is about the right of people who've been elected to take their seats in LegCo. And
exactly. So, for example, if there is a matter about breach of rights without justification, then the court would intervene, and it has intervened in matters, for example, whether sodomy under 21 is an offence, whether it is constitutional. And court intervened to strike down provisions which of the sodomy offence, because it makes an offence, makes a person liable for an offence above 16, because the legal age for homosexual intercourse was 16. So what I'm saying is these two, the duels matter is really about their individual rights to be confirmed as legislative councillors. It's not a matter of socio-economic policy, case of allocation of resources. So it therefore justifies an intervention of the judiciary in this matter.
So they're wasting their time appealing, is what you're saying, and the Legislative Council president shouldn't waste his time joining them.
Because it's not a matter of, for example, a matter of passing a bill, for example, issuing injunction passing of a bill in the Legislative Council. It is a matter of individual rights. So in these sort of matters, it's not a matter of allocation of resources.
Okay, well, there are a lot of other legislators who may be in the same situation. Lau Siu-lai, there's a possible court case starting against her today. But let's follow up on this point of, first of all, of the appeal of the two Young Inspiration, they're not legislators anymore, but the Young Inspiration pair. Mark Daly, international human rights lawyer, also joining us. Do you agree with Lawrence Marr that it's really a waste of time to try and appeal this matter?
No, I still. I mean, there's obviously very number of fundamental issues involved, and I think it's natural for them to want to take it to the higher courts. And I think it's important that we have higher court rulings on these things. And I think it's equally the LegCo president. I think he's taking legal advice still on whether he'll join in the appeal, and I think he should. There's too many weighty issues involved. But getting back to where public money and where we are on this, I mean it's a huge mess, and unfortunately, from a human rights perspective, I see it as still as very important freedom of speech issue, and unfortunately, thought control.
Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. Nobody's denying them the freedom to say this. I mean, nobody's saying that they're not allowed to stand up and say Hong Kong is not part of China. They're simply saying that if you are taking elected office, you have to fulfil certain requirements, and then if you do that, you're not fulfilling that requirement. You're still free to say it.
Exactly right. But at the core of this, and I'll say that I have to run off soon because I have to go to court. We're representing a young man, Chan Ho Tin, who has a directions hearing this morning.
Chan Ho Tin is one of the LegCo candidates, right?
Hong Kong, no, he's one who was invalidated.
Invalidated, sorry, yes. So one of the people who wanted to stand as a candidate, who wasn't allowed to.
And he is from the Hong Kong National Party. But at the core of this is that we think there's nothing inconsistent with a person pledging allegiance to the basic law, at the same time espousing ideas of self-determination. As long as the basic law remains the law, he agrees with that. But there's nothing wrong with saying that you're going to seek change to the basic law and any provisions of the basic law, whether it's likely or not. I mean, obviously, the change to have Hong Kong independent is going to be very, very difficult. But to talk about it, we say there's nothing wrong with that. You don't ossify the basic law.
Before you go, let me ask you about one aspect of the judgment that really rather caught my attention, and that you have a lot of experience from other judicial review cases, which is this young inspiration pair being asked to pay 80% of the costs, including the government lawyers, could come to a huge fee and make it effectively impossible, really, to bring legal action. I mean, is that your experience in these types of cases? I thought in cases involving constitutional significance, the court had more flexibility about
yes,
costs.
Certainly, it's I'm not involved in that case, and I haven't looked at it closely. But certainly, the chilling effect of cost sanctions against applicants, that's a huge issue for access to justice and things like that. The case that we're going to, we're seeking a stay this morning while Mr. Chan has a legal aid appeal that's set down for January. So the issue there is, whether he can even continue or not with his proceedings and with his court challenge, with his election petition, pending getting legal representation. So a number of important issues, slightly different in his case.
Obviously, each case is different, but you have a lot of experience of this. In one of these cases, what kind of legal costs if they're awarded against you? Well, we're talking about costs normally of several $1 million, aren't we?
Well, they could be. I mean, obviously, for the uncertainty for the person who is against the government is that the government often they're actually they throw the kitchen sink at this, so they've got 3 or 4 lawyers and their whole team, and
yes, I mean, I'm looking at
on the hook for their costs.
The case we're talking about with Yao Wei-ching and Sixtus Leung, the government had 4 lawyers, and 2 of them are senior counsels. So you'd be talking about a very heavy bill.
Obviously, very significant costs. So again, that's incentive perhaps to appeal on that as well. Anyway, for me, a huge freedom of speech issue, and also obviously I can't forget the interpretation here, and both the bar and the Law Society have said that usage of the interpretation is bad for the rule of law. And you saw, I was at the silent march of the lawyers, and the turnout was even greater than the last time. So I think people know the significance of these issues, and unfortunately, we're under threat, the rule of law and freedom of speech in Hong Kong.
Okay, Mark Daly, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Lawrence Marr, what about the issue of the costs? The legislators having to pay 80%, perhaps, of the costs. Does that seem right when the case was brought against them?
Well, I mean, obviously the court has ruled so. I mean, the court has issued something called a certificate to counsel, I believe, which means that the court believed that there's so many barristers involved is needed. And this case is really not a case about public policy. It is a case about 2 individuals, whether they qualify to be confirmed as substantive counsels. So they chose to fight the matter out, and therefore, if they lost, the costs follow the event.
But that's it's a terrible choice, isn't it? I mean, we're slightly straying away here from the issues about the Legislative Council itself, but you say they chose to fight, and if this case is brought against them, and what you essentially say there is you either choose to give up immediately, or you put yourself on hook for possibly millions of dollars in legal bills.
Which we all know is the reality of the legal system, but it's a bit exposed a bit nakedly there.
I am still, Lawrence Marr, struck by this because we'd have to go into the details, but there have been many of these famous cases where people have lost and the judge has said, well, you've lost, but there were important constitutional issues here, and so in this circumstance, it's not necessary for costs to follow the event. The government doesn't need to have costs awarded to them on this, does it?
Well, yes and no, because, when it comes to costs, usually the rule is the costs follow the event. Whoever loses pay the cost. But, in judicial review matters, cost is always, as in other legal matters, cost is always discretionary. If there's no case of if the two of them have no prima facie case, because they didn't put up any defense on the merit, then the court wants to punish them in a way that is to award cost order against them. So it must be it must strike the judge that they don't really have a positive case. Factually, they didn't put up any.
Before I go.
Yeah, Mark Daly, you're still there. You're welcome. Welcome to come back in.
No, I'm just about to leave, but if you need 3 senior counsel and a whole team on the government's part...
It's two senior counsel.
Prima facie, you have to say that they think there's a case.
and of course, this was done on the position of the President of the Legislative Council was taken on legal advice, wasn't it, of senior counsel and so on, and he thought he was in the right there, so that you could, there's something to argue about.
However, Lawrence Marr does have a point. Lawrence Marr, you made this point twice now, and of course I've read the judgment, you've read the judgment, not everybody listening would have read the judgment. It is rather curious that, this case was all about whether the legislators neglected or declined to take their oaths, and as you say, and as the judge said, they never sought to argue that they had taken their oaths properly. They simply never, that presumably is why there are so many conspiracy theories around saying that that Yao Wai-ching and Sixtus Leung are actually working for you and other members of the pro-establishment camp, Lawrence Marr.
I don't think that's really true.
Well, you know these theories are around, aren't you? And you can see from their behaviour, perhaps, why it encourages that.
No. Obviously, they're not members of the pro-establishment camp aiming to achieve these sort of results. I don't buy that conspiracy theory, but when it comes to cost, as you correctly pointed out, they didn't put up any positive case. They didn't argue that they properly sworn the oath. So that's why they're punished in a way that the only argument is the principle of non-intervention, that the court shouldn't intervene. And after that argument fails, they don't really have any other arguments to put forward.
Doesn't this mean we have to be very careful about drawing any conclusions from this court case and court cases that might be brought against other legislators like Lau Siu-lai and so on, because it would be open to them to argue that they did take the oath properly and for that issue to be considered, whereas these two legislators, or former legislators, for whatever reason, didn't choose to even make that argument.
Well, I think, because the interpretation also bar the second swearing in. So, of course, the NPCSC interpretation hasn't been used at all in the case against Sixtus Leung and Yao. But when it comes to other legislative councillors who were taking the oath a second time, there are still a few of them out there, and the NPCSC interpretation would probably be used by the court to disbar them.
Okay. Holden Chow is also with us now, Legislative Vice Chairman of the DAB. Mr. Chow, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning.
Hi, thanks so much indeed for joining us. This is going to go to appeal. That's going to be heard. Then we're going to have the judgment on that. If this goes to the Court of Final Appeal as well, which is quite possible, it could take a very long time. What happens to their seat in the meantime? What should happen?
To my understanding, I think the order already granted by the court will be executed. That means they would be disqualified. But then they would file the appeal, and of course, they are allowed to do so because they will probably raise a legal argument on the point that whether the court has a jurisdiction to intervene the legal business. And I assume this very legal argument would appear and would be the center of the argument in the Court of Final Appeal. But I think, on the other hand, I heard some of the points the guest has raised just now on the fact that they haven't actually argued that they neglect or decline to take the oath. I would assume in the future, when there are other judicial review cases against other candidates, they probably would put up the argument that they actually did not decline or refuse to take the oath. So that is one of my insights. And another thing is,
you think that they will bring that up? You think they will bring that up now?
No,
it's purely my guess. I guess if in the future judicial review cases against other candidates, they would probably put up that argument and say they are not declining or neglecting to take the oath. They actually accept
because I mean,
legal requirements.
Well, some people have found something suspicious in the way that they didn't bring up the merits of the case, because you could argue that they did intend to swear the oath eventually. I mean, that was the practice in the past, that people had made political gestures at one swearing in and then they had made the proper swearing in, and that was the assumption, after all, of the President of the Legislative Council and his legal advice. They were giving them another chance because it was assumed that they would take it later and that they would comply. So they did have the ultimate intention to do it. So, you know, you would have thought would be an obvious case to argue. Why wasn't it argued? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not commenting too much on their legal advice source. I think at the end of the day, they have already made their decision on not to put up that argument. But let me put it that way. Even if they argue in the court that they have an intention to take the oath in accordance with the law, that means they do not decline or neglect to take the oath, I don't think that is very much convincing, because look at all their behavior done when they were sworn in. I mean, the gesture, all the language, the derogatory words. I think nobody would find that very much convincing. But what I'm saying is, in the future judicial review cases, I would guess the other candidates will probably put up that argument. And on the other hand, I heard one of the points made by
you and the pro-establishment camp assumed that they were going to take the oath, didn't you? Because that's why you stopped LegCo. That's why you walked out of LegCo.
I beg your pardon. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Well, that's why you and the pro-establishment camp walked out of LegCo and caused an adjournment, because you assumed that they were going to take the oath. And you wanted to stop them having the chance.
I think, but from our perspective, we believe that they have no intention to take the oath in accordance with the law, because they have no intention to uphold the basic law. Because if you read from their behavior, you probably notice that from the very beginning, they have already denied that Hong Kong is part of China. They deny the fact that the basic law has already enshrined this very important fact, and they also deny the identity of being Chinese. And so we have a serious doubt that if you deny that very fact, why would you still insist on staying here and being the legislator of the Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China? So we would strongly argue that they have no intention to take the oath in accordance with the law, and if they do not uphold the basic law, I don't think it's appropriate for them to stay in the chamber. So that's why at the very beginning, we have a decision, a collective decision within the pro-establishment camp, that we believe that the president ought not to give them a second chance to take the oath.
Now
that's the rationale behind. But let me just make one more point before I finish. I heard a point made by probably is Mr. Daly on Lau Xiaolai, and I want to assert my point of view here. Is I think Lau Xiaolai's oath is not taken in accordance with the law. If you read the judgment handed down in 2004 by Justice Hartman, it was clearly enshrined in that judgment that the manner of the oath should be a common one, and also the public would have a common expectation on the manner taken while they were taking the oath. So that means it's not the manner that you can do it as you like. It's a common and a public manner that the public would expect that you have to follow. So.
But you will, Holden Chow, you will follow that logic to many other legislators as well. How about Nathan Law, who changed the tone of his voice? How about several...
Yes, indeed. Yes, I would just also make a point here that not even Lau Xiaolai, I'm just... because Mr. Daly has just talked about Lau Xiaolai, so now I'm just going to talk about Lau Xiaolai. But not only Lau Xiaolai, but some other candidates. I'm not going to comment on each individual cases because cases should be judged on its own merits. But
you're commenting on Lau Xiaolai, so what's the difference? Why can't we talk about other individual cases like Nathan Law, Fernando Cheung, people who tore up the basic law, held yellow umbrellas, and while they were taking the oath? Surely they all fall in the same category?
Well, first of all, you see there are already judicial review cases filed against these all candidates. I think it's not very much appropriate to comment too much. To comment too much when there was a case pending trial. But because we have, because you raised the point on Lau Xiaolai, so I have to respond. And I'll just let you know that I think Lau Xiaolai's case, I don't think she has complied with the law, and very likely. She might be disqualified on that basis too. But what I'm saying is, if you look at the judgment handed down by Mr. Justice Hartman in 2004, it's already enshrined there that there is a very strict requirement for the manner of taking the oath. Okay. And I don't think she has complied with that.
Okay,
yeah.
Without naming names of other legislators, in addition to Lau Xiaolai, you believe there are other legislators, even if you don't want to identify the individual ones right now, other ones who should also be disqualified, right?
I would say not only Lau Xiaolai, but some other candidates. But because I don't think it's appropriate to comment too much on each individual case. So I will leave it here.
Some means we're not just talking about one more. We're talking about possibly several more. I mean, at one stage we're talking about 15 more.
I mean, Holden Chow, some people have said to me, well, the government, the pro-establishment and the government lost the election, and so they're kicking out the legislators. It's as simple as that. It's revenge.
Well, I don't see it that way. It's just all about the law and how would you comply with the law, because if you read
they tried to stop these people standing.
Even with the interpretation from the NBC, that you basically have to take the oath in accordance with the law, and you have to uphold the basic law and pledge allegiance to Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China. If you fail to comply with that requirement, why would you be able to stay here? It is a matter of compliance with the law. That's all. It's not about the point you talk about the conspiracy and say we lost the election and now we have to kick out those legislators. It's not that way. I never see it that way. I think it's all about the law. It's all about compliance with the law.
Okay.
And we are talking about the basic law, which is our mini constitution. It's of paramount importance to Hong Kong, isn't it?
All right. Well,
and to our one country, two system.
Holden Chow, we're going to break for the news, and I thank you very much indeed for joining us, legislator, Vice Chairman of the DAB, and Mark Daly also joining us earlier, International Human Rights Law. We're going to continue the conversation, the discussion after the news at 9, and air some of your emails. Thank you very much indeed for those. The weather before the news, sunny intervals for forecast for today. It's going to become cloudy with a couple of rain patches as well. Temperatures up to about 26 degrees. Cloudy with a few rain patches in the next few days, and significantly cooler in the middle of next week. 24 Celsius now, relative humidity at 85%.
Resignation last night, which felt pretty good. I got 64 days left, and I think I'd have a hard time with my wife anything past that.
You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back. This is Backchat, last one of the week on a Friday morning with Danny Gittings and me, Hugh Chiverton. We're continuing to talk about the appeal by those lawmakers, or are they former lawmakers? I'm not quite clear. No one's quite clear at the moment against the ruling on the judicial review. We have with us now Lawrence Ma, who's a barrister, chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. And we're also joined now by Chris Young, who's a political commentator and founder of The Voice of Hong Kong, which is available online. Later, we're also going to be talking about the Consumer Council, and they measured some, they looked at some moisturising creams, and they found the ones that cost several $1,000s were slightly less effective than the ones that cost a couple of $100s. So we'll be talking about that with Gilly Wong later in the programme. Our email address, as usual, backchat@rthk.hk. Our Facebook page is Backchat on RTHK Radio 3, and our telephone number is 233-88266, 233-88266. Danny, just before we go on, Danny, so you were, we did the election special last week, and then you went to San Francisco, didn't
I left
you?
the following night for San Francisco.
And what was the reaction there?
Well, I mean, you have to remember, life does go on. I mean, it's San Francisco, what I was reading, 93% voted for Hillary, so there's not much support for Trump in that town, but you don't think there's been this sudden crushing defeat. I mean, people continue their life. I mean, about the closest really got to it was when I went over to run a half marathon, and as I was running along, there was a notice saying, "Keep running, Canada's only 1,000 miles away."
Okay, back to the issue at hand, and some emails. This is from RJH. Who says on the cost of not taking the oath correctly, of course they're not fighting it because they realise how much money they have lost by not having a well-paid job for 4 years. A quick calculation is attached. Silly kids, says RJH. And let's see. Adeline says, C.Y. Leung and his cronies have clearly identified the ultimate way to stimulate CCP's raw nerve and their sense of great opportunities for eliminating the strong demand for democratic electoral changes. From highlighting a Hong Kong News student magazine that no one had heard of at the time, to now having created these two naive and bloody-minded fools for giving him and his CCPs a perfect excuse to destroy the independent judicial system of Hong Kong. I can appreciate why Martin Lee thinks Miss Yao and Miss Leung could be members of the so-called CCP Hong Kong B team to cause confusion and distractions from the genuine democratic demands of Hong Kong people. Personally, I think they are just very ignorant and extremely arrogant young people with no sense of responsibility to their voters nor the Hong Kong communities. That comes from Adeline.
So we're joined now by Chris Young, political commentator and founder of the Voice of Hong Kong website. And if you look on the Voice of Hong Kong website, that's vohk.hk, an article by Chris Leung, is mission of Leung, Yao, done or ruined, talking about these conspiracy theories that they are basically adjunct provocateurs, and they are out. The idea is that they are out to ruin the cause of Hong Kong independence and provoke a reaction from China. And indeed, Chris Young mentions a student assembly at Shuan University when Sixtus Leung was specifically grilled on whether he is a ghost, an undercover installed by the Chinese Communist Party in the pan-democratic camp to stir up trouble. So, Chris, good morning. You've written quite extensively about these conspiracy theories. Well, what do you make of them? Is there possibly a ring of truth in them? Or?
Well, first, I think in Hong Kong politics, I think there are always all sorts of, say, conspiracy theories, which I think have been have come up, I think, obviously, because sometimes you can't explain certain behavior judged based on, say, what you have seen. You can't really explain in a more rational or objective manner. So I think that creates a room for speculation and for conspiracy. I think one quite prevalent, in the perhaps social media circle or those who are interested in Hong Kong politics is that something must be behind this two young person, because you really can't explain why they have gone so far, say, to test the tolerance of the Communist Party, which I think to a lot of people are not someone that can be easily dealt with. They could react in a very fierce manner, as we have seen in this time, that fifth interpretation of the basic law. So and also there's some intriguing, say, background about this person. So I think that creates the kind of a soil for such a conspiracy theory. I have to say I'm a trained journalist, so very often I have to see the concrete evidence. So whether that could lead to, say, some kind of justifiable, say, conclusion, or that they are kind of they've been paid to cause trouble. So far, I haven't seen any concrete evidence.
But you don't. So, you're not rejecting out of hand, are you? Are you saying so there certainly isn't evidence to prove it? It's just a theory, it's a suspicion, but it's not something that you would reject out of hand and say, "Oh, it's all nonsense."
Well, until after I see evidence one way or another, I can't really say rule anything out. But on the other hand, I kind of can understand a little bit about the sentiments of this localist or we'll say pro-independence activists. I think they are really part of the growing, say, community in Hong Kong, particularly among the young people, those maybe in the age groups between 15 to 30, who have been inclined to that idea. You call it self-determination or pro-independence, but basically they are getting more worried about their future under Chinese rule. So they want to do something. They want to test. They want to discuss this kind of self-determination idea. Even though so far I don't think any one of them or any one of those groups have come up with a more specific or sophisticated idea, and also how to turn it into reality. So when I look at this oath-taking controversy, I think this is really a reflection of what's going on in the past 2 years, which is culminated in a pretty extraordinary case that they picked oath-taking as a battle, not knowing the dangers. I think the danger, based on perhaps some, if we look back, maybe a misread of the judgment by Justice Hartman back in 2004, that they thought that kind of so-called separation of powers could be the strongest defense. And number two, I think that factor hasn't come up in the debate quite prominently. It's the kind of expectation. I think they look at what happened in the past. Long hair, Wang Yukman, they expect that they would be given a second chance. They did. They did get a second chance from president, but now it's overturned by the court, by High Court, and also rule, not the case in the NPC Standing Committee interpretation.
Yes. Lawrence Ma, I think some people will say, well, this is if anything, this is just going to harden the opposition. This is going to show people that, in fact, the Central People's Government disregards the view of the voters. It disregards the view of the President of the Legislative Council. It disregards the view of the Chief Executive and of the Secretary for Justice, who brought this case, which was brushed aside in the interpretation. This is not going to win any fans for Beijing. This is only going to cause more trouble and more disruption and more distance.
Yes. To that point, I agree. I mean, but in the mind of the, I would speculate that in the mind of the state leaders in the CCP, I think the most important thing for them is anything to do against Hong Kong independence, which is something that is totally intolerable. I mean, they would.
But if anything, they're encouraging, they're stoking feelings of independence by doing this. So they're just adding to the problem.
Well, I think you can't say that would encourage independence, but I would rather say that they've taken a hard line against any independent movement. Or whether those people, or maybe if there is 10,000 of people who suddenly turn independentist after this interpretation, so be it. I mean, it is very much so that not of significance to them.
Okay, some more emails. Peter, this is from a couple of days ago, actually, with a late email, which is resubmitted. It says, the efforts of the pro-establishment camp to get more LegCo members removed is a transparent attempt to try to load LegCo with their own supporters. Their conduct is every bit as juvenile and immature as the Youngspiration members. If they want to challenge other members who've had to take their oath twice, why stop at this LegCo? Why not try to invalidate all the oaths who had to take votes of all those who had to take their oath twice in previous legislative councils? That comes from Peter. Anthony says, this is addressed to Mark Daly, who was speaking in the first part of the programme, but Anthony's remind us of a bit of Hong Kong history. He says, do you think the CE should be like our beloved Governor Robert Black to deport the Youngspiration pair? Can anyone shed some light on what legal ground that Black could deport the principal of Poi Kyu Middle School without any trial, as Mr To was said possessing a publication against the British administration? Why Mr To didn't have the chance to appeal, or none of you guys know this important history in Hong Kong? That's from 1958.
It's a long time ago. I don't think necessarily we had the concept of permanent residency there, where you have a right to stay and you can never be deported.
Okay.
In those days, there isn't a constitutional right of abode as such in Hong Kong. It's very much so you stay at the pleasure of the government.
Yeah. Okay. Tom, in an email, says, as most of the experienced Hong Kong journalists with an understanding of CY and the CCP have highlighted, both Ms Yao and Mr Leung have been truly the main actors of CY and CCP's playbook or movie scripts, whether knowingly or not. Their actions have continuously damaged Hong Kong. Martin Lee just simply cannot believe how naive and stupid as well as bloody-minded Ms Yao and Ms Leung are. That's all. That comes from Tom. Thank you very much indeed for that. Chris Young, do you think that... How far are the government going to push this? I expressed it before in terms of, how many out of 15. If there are 15, possible, lawmakers that could be disqualified, how far are they going to go? 2, maybe 3 seems quite possible. Beyond that, I mean, because beyond a certain point, you're going to get too much of a reaction, I guess, aren't you?
Yes, I think extremely unlikely that there will be, say, more than 10. I said that this program.
But it could be as many as 10. You think as many as 10 could be?
No, not possible. Not possible.
Less than 10.
I said that this program a couple of days ago that Lau Xiaolai is a kind of a 50-50, and
2.5.
It seems that she's the most vulnerable case. Because I think the most fundamental thing is really the oath each of them has taken. That's what the High Court judge, based on when he made the ruling on Leung and Yao, and the two cases are so obviously different from the rest. And for others, I think even the government cannot stop residents to take those people to court as they did. And but I think from the remarks made by people like Elsie Leung,
and Zhang Yuxing, and it seems that the central government took a hardline position on their political principle, those in the basic law interpretation. But when it comes to concrete cases, I think Elsie Lam has already hinted at she didn't believe that there will be a lot of, say, elected, say, lawmakers being, say, kicked out.
But Elsie Lam is not a judge. It's not for her to decide. I mean, this is a problem. I can understand from a political perspective. It looks bad for the government. They want to see these two and Lau Shulai disqualified. They probably like it to stop there. So from a political perspective. But once you start these court cases, you get this interpretation. I mean, it can be applied much more widely.
Yes, exactly. That's what my point is, that from the legal point of view, that the others are relatively weaker cases, and from the political perspective, and I think even within the pro-establishment circle, and even within the central government, they have to assess the kind of a political fallout. If, say, more than 10, say, pan-Democrat legislators are disqualified, and you can't rule out, say, a pretty massive, say, public outcry against it. And also, it will be quite damaging to Hong Kong as a whole. I mean, to the international community, it could be very damaging.
Yeah, okay, some comment from Henry on our Facebook page, who says, I feel sorry for the future of Leung and Yao. After this incident, who would want to hire them? They could go bankrupt arising from legal wrangles. Who wants to marry either one, since they could utter four-letter words in marriage oaths? He says their appeal would not bring a different ruling, since the judgment is watertight and the MPC's interpretation is binding on Hong Kong courts. The judgment clarifies that separation of powers have to take into account the legal framework in Hong Kong, where the basic law is a mini-constitution. It also pinpoints past LegCo presidents wrong in allowing a second oath, i.e. not firm enough in oath-taking matters. Paul Zimmerman says the young